Okay, welcome, really, truly welcome to this panel on Rethinking UCR in the age of COVID-19. I want to extend enormous thanks to the Center for Ideas in Society, to Georgia Warnke, Catherine Henshaw, Jessica DiFilippo, for your generosity, your support in being open to this possibility and hosting it and supporting it and providing labor for it. And thanks to my co-organizer, Deborah Wong, who is joining us in a little bit. You all know why we're here. I don't have to go into detail. We're facing a crisis. It's heightening many longstanding challenges. Many members of our community are disproportionately impacted. And the idea behind this series of panels that the CIS is now hosting, this is one of 3 confirmed and hopefully more, is to begin a deliberative process that's outside of the formal administrative structures, and an attempt to claim some ownership and responsibility for our own collective survival. I know that there are many of us here. The number is increasing by the minute. We all have many thoughts. I'm sure we all have even more emotions right now. And I want to try and honor all of it the best that I can. So we'll hopefully find structures, find outlets for all of it to be recognized collaboratively. I want to start by introducing and thanking these outstanding campus leaders who are panelists. And I'll just go through alphabetically. Aram, Ayra, UCR alum and the founder of the Riverside Mutual Aid Network. Xochitl Chavez is assistant professor in the Department of Music. She's also faculty in residence at the UCR Pentland Residence Hall. Jennifer Hughes, associate professor in the Department of History and co-chair of the association that was known as the Women's Faculty Association, but is more inclusive than it sounds. Danielle Lopez-Salas, UCR alumnus and coordinator of the Our Pantry. Pat Morton, associate professor in media and cultural studies and chair of the Riverside Faculty Association. Crystal Petrini is department manager for English and philosophy and also president of the UCR Staff Assembly. Dylan Rodriguez, professor of media and cultural studies and chair of the UCR Academic Senate. Because I have the floor, I'm going to take a minute to cheer Dylan for years of outstanding leadership as he prepares to step down from the Academic Senate, and to thank you. Jason Steich.
Overrated.
Ha! You have 150 people who will say the opposite. I'm sorry, you're overruled. Jason Steich is a professor of microbiology and plant pathology and the incoming chair of the Academic Senate. Thank you for joining us. And then finally, Pablo Ensueta, graduate student in the Department of Chemistry and Vice President of Internal Affairs of the UCR Graduate Student Association. We have a packed panel. Just a note about logistics. We're going to try and keep to about 45 minutes to hear from the panelists and then open time for discussion. Please you're already availing yourselves of the chat bar at any time to respond to the panelists, ask questions, carry on sidebar conversations. If you would like to speak a question or comment once we get to the Q&A, you can just click on that. I'm sure you all know how to get to the raise hand button by now. And Georgia Warnke is going to keep track of folks raising their hands and recognize them at the Q&A. We're recording this meeting, so if you speak, you will become part of that recording. After the end of the panel, we plan to leave the Zoom room open for 30 extra minutes as a kind of virtual reception space. I'm also going to provide a link in the chat bar to a dedicated Piazza discussion board for those who want to continue these discussions after the session is over. And I'll post a whole series of useful links. If people are okay with it, I'd like to anonymize some of the chat bar comments and put them up in Piazza so that there's a record of some of these conversations. Please feel free to let me know if you would not like your comments to be included or if you would like to be named. Okay, so that's it for logistics. Let's get started with our panelists. I'd like to start by sketching out the ecosystem in which we're operating. What are the already existing alliances and strategies that we can build on? And I'd like to start with Dylan to ask if you could help Dylan, help us situate the circles of power and decision-making in which we're situated, from the state of California to UCOP, the Board of Regents, Senate, local administration, and in particular, where do you see the most effective sites for intervention and for organization? Handing it off to Dylan.
Great, y'all can hear me okay, right? All right, it's usually not a problem when I'm talking. So let me start at the last question in a certain sense, Dana, because I want to first honor the UC Santa Cruz graduate students who engaged in what's called a wildcat strike, meaning a strike that was unauthorized by the union, as a last resort, rather desperate and in some quarters overdue action to try to deal with the fact that you have large numbers of graduate students and many others at that campus who are dealing with acute food insecurity, housing insecurity, lack of living wage, essentially. And the reason I want to honor them is because they're actually facing a new round of discipline from the administration, just as we thought that things had reached a reasonable resolution. It was a grade strike. Anyways, I want to honor that group of folks who have, I think, courageously and somewhat desperately taken action over the last few months. And a lot of the talk of the outcomes of that strike have faded with all the concerns that we've had around the COVID-19 pandemic, quarantining, social distancing, sheltering, and the kind of evacuation of campuses. But in a sense, I think starting there, response to the question of where the possibilities for intervention are. I mean, there's a certain sense in which I would call them cross-class solidarities and alliances. In this case, it would mean collective work that moves across faculty, staff, and students, which is all too rare. And I think we're to blame for most of that. I actually think that faculty are to blame for most of that, because I think that there's a certain professionalization that we go through when we get our PhDs and enter the tenure track profession that sometimes without our full understanding leads us to believe that we're along the lines of being contractors to the university rather than workers at the university. So if nothing else, what this situation of the last couple of months has, I think, reminded a lot of us in various professions is that we are in fact workers, and we are in fact subjected to the conditions and the kind of relations of power that workers face. Now, that's not to say all workers are the same, but to the extent that faculty can understand and treat their position as a worker's position, I think it brings us into a much closer possibility of building effective and long-term rather than episodic alliances and solidarities with student, staff, contingent faculty, and so forth. And frankly, I think that scares the shit out of the administration at all levels, including and especially UCOP, right? And I know y'all know that's true. So I think that's a fact. And again, I'm outgoing chair, so I have nothing to lose in saying all this, right? Not that I had a good way of keeping my mouth shut before that, but just being real, like that's what it is that I think is most threatening to the hierarchy of the UC system. So I'll do a really quick attempt at crystallizing what the hierarchy of power in the UC system looks like. And I preface this by saying, I'm talking about the formal hierarchy of power. This does not mean that we are disempowered or powerless, precisely because of what I just started the conversation with, right? So I'm talking about the institutional hierarchy of power. I'm not talking about power generally. I think there's a lot of capacity, potential that is imminent, that is at our fingertips for insurgent, transformative, progressive forms of institutional power that have nothing to do with trying to make our way into these formalized institutional bureaucratic hierarchies of power, right? But we need to understand what that hierarchy of power is. So this is my best attempt at crystallizing that, and I apologize for any gaps I leave, which will be, I'm sure, many. First, you have the state of California, by which what I really mean is the legislature. The California legislature, what we need to understand, if we don't already, is that elected legislators in the assembly and so forth are overwhelmingly graduates of the CSU system. What I've seen, but what folks have known for years, is that the legislature as a whole really does not understand or appreciate the mission of the UC system, in particular, its distinctive research mission. That's not their fault necessarily, right? This is not a kind of CSU prejudice, although it partly is that. That's not what I'm saying is the source of this. I actually think it's a problem that derives from a history of ineffective leadership and communication from the UC system, including and especially the office of the president. Frankly, I think this is why Janet Napolitano was appointed as the UC system president. She has a political background. I mean, hell, it's hard being her and getting elected governor of Arizona. I mean, that's a work of fucking magic, right? So I think that there was a notion that by making her president of the UC system, that she would kind of wield her Clinton-esque political skills and rhetorical skills to convince the legislature that they should be funding and supporting the UC system. Well, we've seen how that's gone, right? We've had multiple audits of her office and just ineffective. It's been ineffective, and it's pretty frustrating. So this is one of the chief problems, is that we have a legislature which is at best indifferent to the UC system, and more frequently is actually quite hostile toward the UC system. We are seen, we meaning people in the UC system, we're seen as working for an institution that is decadent, that is not doing as good a job at producing undergraduate degrees as the CSUs, and which is engaged in this vague thing called research that nobody cares about or understands, right? And again, it's because I think the communication and leadership around that part of our university mission has been profoundly ineffective for many years. So I'm kind of bombing on Janet right now, but it's not just her, it's her predecessors as well. So by the way, this is not a pitch. I do not ever want to be president of the UC system, so I'm not saying that, right? So don't take it that way. I'm just saying that we've had a lack of leadership in the UC system. Dude, they'd never want my ass anyways. But regardless, it's been a lack of leadership. I want to make sure that that's clear, right? It's a totality of problems. After that, you've got the Board of Regents. Again, I know most of y'all on the call already understand this, but just to remind ourselves, right? The UC Board of Regents, they are not educators. They are not researchers. By and large, they are not teachers. They're usually people with the background of being CEOs of corporations. They're usually people who often have a background as elected officials. They're folks who have worked in the governor's office, right? For example, the current Board of Regents, you have the CEO of the Geffen Company. You have multiple people who have worked in the governor's office in the state of California, and the current chair, John Perez, is former Speaker of the California Assembly. So these are, by and large, folks appointed by the governor, with the exception, of course, of the student regent and the faculty representatives to the regents. That's the chair and the vice chair of the system-wide Senate. So the regents they're not educators, right? They're there to run the UC system based on what they know, which is as elected officials, people working in the governor's office, and as CEOs. I'll also make a special point that the current Board of Regents took some pretty reprehensible actions toward our current system-wide chair by refusing to allow her to participate in the meetings, the advisory committee meetings that were deliberating over the selection of the incoming or the selection of the prospective new UC system president, which is, I think it's unprecedented that the UC system-wide Senate chair was not allowed into those meetings. So the whole notion of shared governance is something that the Board of Regents treat like an obstacle or an annoyance, at least recently. So there's that piece, right? The Board of Regents, everything goes through them. I think most folks here know this. Then after that, of course, you have the individual campuses with individual administrations. They all have their own nuances. What we need to understand about our campus is that because we are disproportionately dependent on state funding, because we are a campus that produces, graduates who are not coming from wealthy families, right? They're not born to wealthy people. They're not born to multi-generational wealth. They're folks who are, in essence, kind of personifying what the UC system of public education was supposed to be at its founding, absent the white supremacy and patriarchy of it. So we don't have a big endowment, right? We don't have all this private donation money coming in. So we're actually more along the lines of a conventional, traditional notion of a public university that's supposed to be state funded. So that puts us on the weak end of a lot of negotiation within the UC system. And that's the position our administration is oftentimes caught in, right? Is that because we're dependent on the UC office of the president and the state, we have to, I think, make a lot of compromises and accept a lot of things that otherwise we wouldn't have to accept because of that economic, that material, disempowerment relative to other campuses. And then, of course, you have the Senate. The Senate, what we actually control is the educational mission, the degree granting piece, right? Approval of programs, right? So we have basic autonomy over the academic mission and the research mission of the university. We don't control the resources, meaning the money, right? We don't control that. We advise on that, but we don't control it. We don't control appointments and hires. We advise on it, right? We actually don't even control promotions and merits, right? What Committee on Academic Personnel, CAP, what they do, they advise on it, right? And oftentimes their decisions get overthrown or overridden by the higher ranks of the campus. And sometimes that's good for us and sometimes it's bad for us, right? So it's just to say that folks sometimes impute more official power to the Senate than it actually merits. On most of the things that have to do with the infrastructure of the campus outside the academic mission, actually almost everything outside the academic mission, we are advisory, right? So the question is whether our advisory capacities are being utilized to their fullest, whether our advisory relationship to our administration is healthy or not. And when we have disputes and conflicts, whether we're able to find a way to engage with those things and generate the kind of appropriate debate and contradiction and ideally some form of resolution that is reasonable. That's ideal. That's what the whole premise of the shared governance relationship is. We have faculty, student, and staff organizations all across the board. I don't want to go through them all here because I want to cede the floor to somebody else. But Pat Morton, who's on this call on this panel with the Riverside Faculty Association, of which I'm a proud member, is another body that's linked to. Well, I'll let Pat talk about it. But it's linked to a system-wide set of faculty associations. That can be a profoundly powerful body of folks as well. We have a former ASUCR president on the call with Aram. The student body, the ASUCR has historically been capable of really exerting a lot of power. The staff assembly, we have Crystal Petrini, who's on the call right now, who can talk about staff assembly. We of course have union leadership. So we have bodies, we have organized bodies for all these constituencies. I think part of what the COVID-19 moment brings forward is whether and how we can draw connections and share political interests, and actually at this point, epidemiological and health interests across these constituencies in some way to protect ourselves against exposure to undue exposure anyways, or unnecessary exposure to vulnerabilities that we really shouldn't be facing as workers at this university. So I'll stop there. I left a lot out, but I'll stop there because I've been talking too long.
Thank you so much, Dylan. I really appreciate it. Perfect segue to Pat. I'm hoping that you can speak to precisely that, the role of labor-oriented organizing from faculty associations to unions, and in particular, the UCR Labor Alliance.
All right, great. Thank you. It's great to be here. Great to see all of you. So I'm the chair of the Riverside Faculty Association, which is a voluntary dues-supported association of faculty. It was founded in the 70s. The faculty associations go back to a period when the Senate was very weak, and a group of faculty felt that we needed to have an alternative to the Senate that would be more radical, more activist. So that tradition still holds true. We try to advocate and use our voices as loud as we can to cover things that perhaps the Senate does cover, but which maybe we can amplify. We're part of the Council of UC Faculty Associations, or CUCFA, which is a system-wide coalition of the different faculty associations across 9 out of the 10 campuses. We still don't have Merced. But that's very powerful. There are two things that CUCFA does. One is that we can share information, and we can also act together in coalition. And that's, again, we can be much more nimble than the Senate in some respects. And we can also be more radical, frankly. We try to speak in Wilcox's face as much as we can, which I know Dylan does too. But so we share information across the system, which is really valuable because the campuses tend to be kind of siloed, And I'll talk about that a lot during the course of this conversation. So CUCLA can also lobby. So we have someone who actually follows legislation in Sacramento. We also have a sort of status as a union because way back when the faculty associations were founded, Santa Cruz voted to become a union. It was the only one that did, the only one of the faculty associations, but it gives us certain sort of information that we get as union, sort of, right? I'll talk more about that later. So, so RFA, you know, we speak loudly and we try to be part of whatever is important at the campus. But what I'd like to really speak more about, just briefly, is the UCR COVID-19 Labor Alliance, which was put together by Ellen Reese, who's professor in sociology and the head of the labor studies program. And it's a coalition of undergraduate and graduate students, including some of the people from UCR for COLA, the COLA movement that started at Santa Cruz. We have also staff members, we have union representatives, lecturers, and Senate faculty. So it's a pretty unique group of people and it's very powerful. And we really sort of started mostly just as kind of mutual aid. But then we did have a webinar, and that's in the chat. You can go and watch the webinar, which was really amazing. It was about living conditions and learning conditions and the kind of slippage between our working conditions and the ways in which the lockdown has really eroded our ability to control our working experience, our working conditions, and the really tremendous and negative impact that that's had across the board. So being able to compare experiences, but also provide mutual aid to each other to the degree we can, has been really important. And so the latest thing we've done is that we've created a set of demands around housing, because their family housing especially has been really negatively impacted. And I imagine we'll hear more about that. But anyway, we have 3 demands that we've, because this has come out of our conversations, and actually some of this is in the webinar. First of all, we want extended leases for all graduating students, for families, and for anyone who is potentially homeless. People are kicked out of student housing and family housing after they graduate. They have a month to find housing, which, given the fact that many of these people don't have income anymore, TAs are not paid over the summer, et cetera, you can see where I'm going. Second, cancel rent for 12 months. We know it's a big ask, but you know, we're asking. And third is to reinstate the resident advisor's stipend, which for reasons I do not understand was cut back. Some of these residents, RAs, they have families. They can't feed their families because their meal plan only covers them, not their families. So and then the fourth would be to stop garnishing federal aid to collect rent. So these are the types of things that we can ask for when we talk to each other. And this is what I really believe, just as Dylan said, we need to have these kinds of affiliations across every part of the community. And unless we do, we're siloed into our own concerns, like, oh, are we going to have faculty pay cuts or furloughs? Well, that's important, but there are a lot of other important issues. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Matt. I want to turn to Aram, who's former ASUCR president and founder of the Riverside Mutual Aid Network, to ask if you could speak to student and community organizations like the Mutual Aid Network and their role in shaping the life of our communities.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Thanks again for having me here. And can everyone hear me pretty well? Okay, cool. So yeah, first off, I kind of want to talk a little bit or expand the definition of community, because I feel like oftentimes when we have these discussions, our concept of community is sort of mostly in and directly around UCR. But really, as really the top job creator in the city and such a major engine for economic activity, UCR doesn't only serve the student, staff, and faculty communities, but also the greater community of Riverside. And that line of thinking in which, you know, UCR is not just a university that happens to exist in the community, but rather a major anchor institution that has responsibility to the community that it exists in is sort of what led to the creation of Riverside Mutual Aid Network. I mean, we got on a call with political representatives from across the country to kind of get an idea of what mutual aid was, how we could implement it in Riverside. And we realized that a lot of the groups, especially low-income, marginalized immigrant communities that are just outside the university's direct sphere of influence, are going to be the hardest hit by the economic and social impacts of COVID-19. And we mobilized to meet, the community needs. And I want to highlight before I go forward that a lot of this mutual aid work was happening already in the communities. There's a lot of Riverside community associations that represent, marginalized groups that have been doing this work for a very long time. What we launched the mutual aid network on was to, in reaction specifically to COVID-19, and functioning as more as a bridge between the university and the community groups themselves to fill any gaps. And one of the things we noticed in sort of reacting to COVID-19 was that the Riverside community itself has long been affected by issues of income inequality, housing insecurity, and a volatile low-wage job market that existed long before COVID. But the issues got exacerbated by, obviously, the virus. And those need to be addressed long-term as we go through this discussion. And also we realized that there's really not enough cohesive collaboration between UCR, the city, and the existing community groups. And the result is that there's large gaps in coverage, limited resources that folks have access to, and probably not a term that's unfamiliar to folks here, but a massive silo effect that we've seen across the city, where we have one group doing something great and then the city jumping ahead and trying to sort of co-opt a lot of the work that's happening, and as a result we've noticed that there is a sort of a lack of ownership around the issue, which is, if you want the community involved and participating, and you want them the issues centered, I think, the focus has to be on the community. It can't be co-opted. So what we view Riverside Mutual Aid Network as, which, if folks don't really know what mutual aid is, we basically try to connect community members with resources to community members with needs outside of existing government and nonprofit structures. So we pursue more of a solidarity model instead of a charity model, which we think is important for the growth of the city. And I think instead of, viewing it as, oh, the university just has obligations, it's the university is a part of the community and is a part of that collective survival. So we really see the future of groups on campus, and I want to sort of speak to what Dylan sort of mentioned with, him mentioning that faculty might have been the biggest obstruction. I don't personally think so. In fact, Dylan reached out early on when he saw the mutual aid network being launched, and has actually come out and volunteered, helped uplift some of the conversations, been very instrumental in the growth of the organization. And that's really, I think, a testament to the faculty. I think generally what we've seen is a lot of the co-opting, and a lot of the lack of coverage comes mostly from the university end, from the administration end. We've worked with a lot of communities on campus during this crisis that have been completely ignored, and generally not taken care of, even though the university has a commitment to its students. So we think groups like this, like mutual aid, are the bridge between stakeholders on campus and the rest of the city, and they will be instrumental in uplifting and centering the concerns of impacted communities going forward. And really, we should be utilizing the human capital that exists on our campus to directly address longstanding issues in the community, while having the community lead. We lead from behind, I think, is what we need to do with
That's great. No, thank you so much. And I want to just add that we CIS is going to organize a panel specifically about this very issue, about the broader the local and regional communities and UCR's role. So thank you for starting that really important conversation. We're not doing so well in keeping to time, but I kind of figured that would happen. We'll do the best that we can. But all of these responses have been so important. I think it's hopefully been worthwhile. Moving on to another sort of frame, thinking about what quality and standards look like in a pandemic and after. How might we evaluate with empathy, to quote my colleague, Juliet Levy? I'm going to turn first to Jennifer and ask if you could speak to your and the Women's Faculty Association broad community, your work in hiring, promotion, pay, and evaluation, and where you see that going.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dana. I want to open by saying I think moments of crisis and destabilization like this, sort of profound destabilization, create opportunities for kind of the assertion and insertion of radical counterclaims, right? So there is, you know, in the moment of crisis, these competing claims and efforts to throw things in one direction or another, right? And I guess I'm thinking of, I found one of the most helpful things I've read many things, but Arundhati Roy's Pandemic as a Portal essay, which, so I've just finished a book on epidemics in Mexico and how communities try to survive those. So in that spirit, I wanted to say, you know, that we've been thinking a bit in the WFA about how to continue to pursue sort of more just relations and more just vision in the moment of crisis when there will be a pushback against that, right? Sort of, and various struggles and various justice-driven efforts, there'll be, you know, they risk losing steam, losing momentum. And so I wanted to say something about the status of women faculty on the campus and use it as an example. And I think we can think about many communities and many conversations on this way. We can think about staff, we can think about students. But just to, so the WFA has been working really hard to try to come up with some meaningful sort of a status of women faculty on our campus. Those, the information is harder to come by than you would think. And so we're working toward trying to continue to push for like a picture of the status of women on our campus, and to try to think about how we could continue to push forward even in the face of crisis, right? Budget crisis especially, right? So we finally came up with we've come up with some numbers. Some of these are more publicly available, but UCR has the lowest percentage of women faculty of any campus in the UC system. We are 38% of the total faculty, and that's after 3 years of really aggressive hiring. So in all of that aggressive hiring that we've done in the last 3 years, we moved the needle barely from 36% to 38%. We have obviously problems of retention as well as hiring, right? The percentage of women faculty at full professor is 24% across the campus. In business and engineering and economics, there are 4 full professors out of 64 faculty. The med school and health sciences are better than most at 40%, and then the general scale, Chaz, is 28%. So goes down again when you have higher rank. So for step 6 and above, the highest rank, there are 18% women at those ranks. So I'm giving this just as sort of an example, right? And how do we not give up on improving that status when at every step we'll be told there's a budget crisis? We have hired the ones we can hire. We can no longer make hires, right? And, you know, I think just trying to think strategically about what we can do, right, to continue. We also had efforts around student evaluation of teaching, a major cross campus forum that was going to include students, undergrad and grad, and faculty, to really think about unconscious bias in student evaluation and teaching. That we had people coming from all over the country to participate in that, and that has had to be canceled. And you can't, so in terms of activism and strategy, you can't really replace the full experience of that as an organizing strategy for full campus-wide impact on a Zoom call, you know? And so, you know, I think we are trying to figure out the best strategies, but not lose sight of that work that was in progress, and continue to push and to look for opportunities and cracks where, even in the midst of crisis, some transformational change can happen, and not to let go of those goals. So that's what I want to say.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I want to turn to Pablo and ask if you could speak to the dual role of graduate students in this process of evaluation, both as teachers and as students. If you have thoughts to share about how we need to rethink student performance evaluation and funding.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Dana, for inviting me. I'll start first with as a role as a teacher. I can personally speak that my students aren't as motivated, and I'm pretty sure other professors here are noticing the same trend. So motivation is definitely one, given that Zoom isn't the most effective medium. And I guess in terms of just teaching with empathy, understanding students aren't necessarily having the best work environments, and working with them as much as possible, showing a lot of leniency, but still caring about the overall education and promoting academic integrity. So I guess that's what I feel most graduate students are trying to do at this moment. You know, in terms of workload, however, it seems like the workload is much different, given that some professors are relying heavily on their graduate students for additional assistance to figure out some technological needs. Other graduate students are doing much more work than they probably should be doing. Others are having technological issues, getting access to internet, a reliable internet access is another issue. So you can imagine that as educators, it's kind of hard to be a good educator when you don't even have the basic supplies to do those things. So, and then, you know, thinking forward in terms of funding, right? We want to be able to support the graduate students that we currently have, but we also don't want to overwork our graduate students as TAs. So there needs to be this fine balance of distribution of TA-ships and funding, such in a way that supports, yet also will also open our campus as a community for future graduate students. And even more so, how do we make that appealing? How do we make, because being a graduate student already isn't appealing, there's a stigma associated with it. So how do we further go forward, knowing that, you know, we might get a pay cut in the future? How do we further promote, you know, recruitment for UCR without just the notion of you're getting a PhD or a master's or whatever? It's also the financial burden, the loans, the endless hours, the hours of isolation. So we need to rethink those ways. I guess that kind of ties in nicely to my next point as teachers, or as students, I mean. So I come from a STEM background, which, you know, obviously a lot of people in the STEM field, their research is impacted. Their research has stopped. They had to build all these things that they spent years trying to establish. So understanding that there's going to be a delay in terms of progress, right? We can say the normative time has extended, but that normative time doesn't mean anything if there isn't funding for graduate students. So how do we, again, how do we continue funding our current graduate students and continue supporting them, that they know that they're well respected and they still will have a means to do so? You know, in terms of the very last point, how should we rethink student performance and evaluation and funding? I've already touched a lot about the funding, but to talk more about performance and evaluation, we need to change the iEval system for, if we're going to do online or remote teaching, asynchronous teaching, whatever you want to call it, in terms of it's very heavily biased towards in-person teaching. So now that we're in a different platform, we need to start rethinking how we want to evaluate whether your instruction is actually effective. So just starting with those sort of conversations will help greatly impact how graduate students can be better educators in the next coming months.
Thank you so much, Pablo. Those were really helpful comments, I think. One last comment on this general frame around quality standards and evaluation, which is to ask of Crystal, if you could share your thoughts, how we might rethink staff evaluation and promotion in the pandemic era and beyond.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Simmons, for your question. So first, I'd just like to start with saying thank you to every single person on this call for making the time to be here. I know that since many of us have been on campus, or since the campus has been officially closed, that our workloads and our emotional and mental burdens have also taken a hit. So thank you for making the time to be here. Already before COVID, I think there was a lot of conversation around staff evaluation and promotion and what kinds of things we could do to make the system a little bit better. And so I think COVID has started to expose some of the inconsistencies and inequities that we face when it comes to staff in terms of being personnel at the university. So going back to Dylan's comment, staff and faculty are viewed in such distinct ways, but when it comes to a pandemic like this, it affects our lives and our families in very similar ways, where we shouldn't have such distinct policies and procedures around how our personal lives are affected. So there were many conversations already around paid family leave and maternity leave, and those inequities between staff and faculty. And I think that even more so now, we're starting to see that staff are immediately the first group to take a burden whenever there's any sort of budgetary crisis. So I would say that's the first thing we need to rethink when it comes to staff. We need to think, what other levers are there that we can pull other than immediately targeting the non-union covered staff and in taking away their merits when, you know, many of the merit increases don't even make the 3% cost of living adjustment that most of us are seeking. And then at the same time, when you're taking that away and we're already 760 staff under our average UC sister campus, then what are you really saying to the staff in terms of the value that they provide? So I think that that's a really big point, is that we need to start really reevaluating, rethinking what we see as staff, the importance of staff within our campus. And we are the third leg of the stool. Absolutely, we could not be a university or the research institution that we are if it weren't for the amazing faculty and students that our institution attracts. But at the same time, operationally, we would not be able to move forward as a campus or as a university without the staff that uphold all of the other things at the campus. And so I think when we start to look at staff as not being disposable members of our campus community, but the members of our campus community that create stabilization and create an environment in which students can have a great place to learn, faculty can focus on their teaching and research, then we can come to a place where we can reevaluate the systems around those things and make them better so that we can retain and attract quality staff to keep our university moving. And so I'd also like to say with that system-wide, we have been working on different resources that we can use in order to attract and retain staff. So whether that be increasing the use of alternative work arrangements such as telecommuting, which I know that we've all been put to the test to see if telecommuting works. And as far as I know, the university is still functioning in most ways that it was before we closed the campus down. And that's due to the labor of all of the folks that are involved, which goes across our entire campus community. So overall, I just say that we really need to think even more so than how we evaluate and promote staff, but we need to really think about how we're treating staff, what the messages we're sending to staff are, and reminding them that they are an important piece of our campus community and they are not disposable, and that we all need to come together for us to really be the best campus that we can be. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Crystal. Much respect to you and all your colleagues, our colleagues, staff colleagues. I want to move now to the final round of thematic questions. I know we're late, I'm sorry. I'm late teaching too. which is how we address and care for differential burdens among staff, students, and faculty. And I want to start with dear colleague Daniel and ask how we move from an emergency response mode, which I know you are 1,000% in right now, to sustainability and what structural changes are needed to make that happen.
Yeah, thank you everybody for joining us today, and thank you, Dr. Simmons, for the invitation. Well, before we get started, I just want to give a quick shout out to all our well staff and staff volunteers from our various departments, facilities, care, the rec center. The rec center and our student athlete department, who really stepped up in these last few weeks to support our programming and in our services to students. And as many of you know, right, of course, the majority of us have been able to go home, but basic needs, unfortunately, does not happen, right? A lot of the times behind the screen. It happens when you make that person-to-person contact. And so we've, though the majority of campus has left, right, we are still on campus multiple days a week serving our most in need students. And so I feel like to really understand how we transition from an emergency response to sustainability, right, I think we also really need to understand our student population. And so, 60% of our students are first generation students, right? 48 of our students have expressed that they face food insecurity at some point in their undergraduate career, right? And so, we've functioned as a basic needs program here at UCR in an emergency space, right, for such a long time that transitioning into this work of meeting this basic needs for students is really not very unfamiliar to us. It changed some of our procedures and the way that we go about working with our students a little more, but it's not really much different. I think having functioned under this emergency space, right, it has led us to be really creative in the last few years on how to meet the needs of our students who are most at risk, right? And so I think that the way that we transition into a more sustainable model is when we have a full campus commitment, right, to the needs of our students. So not only mental health, physical health, but also systemic inequities, right? A lot of our students are coming to campus and they don't know the resources that are available. They don't know that they can apply to services. The majority of students who received free or reduced lunch, right, in grade school, right, are moving to a totally new place without that safety net. And so I think one of the ways that we can really meet the needs of our students is by connecting, right, with our local county offices. So really thank you, Aram, for bringing up that point, that as a campus we haven't really built that connection to work in collaboration with our local organizations and institutions. So we make CalFresh and Medi-Cal automatic when students are coming onto campus. The majority of the time, students and just folks in general, right, they come to us when they're already in crisis and not before. And so the way that we ease that, right, that we support our students is making sure that safety net is already there before they reach a point of distress. I think another way is definitely making the experience of our students and our staff visible, right? So we don't normalize food insecurity, but we bring it to light. And we let folks know this is an experience that someone else is having, because that when students find out, right, like I'm not the only one, it's a very, very powerful experience. And it's really empowering to know, like, okay, well, if my friend is going to the pantry, then I feel empowered to then go or take a friend with me to then be able to support myself. Again, just reiterating that we do need to institutionalize the safety nets, right? That for our historically marginalized communities, and so like CalFresh and Medi-Cal, right? Like these are services that are available to legal permanent residents and US citizens, but then what happens to our undocumented students, right? What happens to our LGBTQ family who for the unfortunate circumstance, right, of homophobia that exists in our society, that they don't have that safety net of families, right, of their nuclear families to support them. So we really need to step in as an institution to provide these safety nets before the crisis comes on. And then really to drive the point home for Crystal, right, is we also need to think about the basic needs of our staff as well. There have been instances that in the pantry where staff come up and ask like, hey, is the pantry open to staff? And unfortunately, because of our funding structure, it's not, right? But we make sure that nobody goes home that night without food, right? We want to make sure that folks have a full stomach to be able to do the very important work that we already know is the work of 3, 4, 5 different staff members, right? And so, I mean, more important than like the physical structures, right, that we can have in the institution, it's really the relationships that we've built. Again, huge shout out to our athletics for allowing us to use their space, because now we're able to do drive up distributions. So students are able to drive up and we just drop off the food in their vehicles, making it among the most safest distributions we've ever developed, right? And as students are preparing to decide which universities they're going to go to, the Our Pantry and our basic needs resources are going to be the like up and center, right? They're going to be the first face. They'll be the face that they come in contact with first when they come. They want to know that when they come to our institutions, when they come to UCR, that they will be taken care of. And a lot of our students, right, being first generation, like their families want to know that when they send out their children, that they will have the things that they need. And so I think really the relationship building that we can build, right, and the really institutionalizing the services that already exist can really go a long way to transition us from always responding in emergency and working in a space of sustainability and camaraderie.
Thank you so much, Daniel. That was incredibly useful. I want to turn to Xochitl and ask, given your experiences as faculty in residence, and more broadly, what alliances and policies do you see as needed to care for differential burdens among faculty and students?
Saludos a todos. Thank you so much for this invitation to be part of this really vital conversation. So I'm going to echo a lot of ideas that have been brought up, so since my experience as a UC alum from UC Santa Cruz, and then as a faculty member, one of the biggest issues that I think we're all talking about here is, in mind, the inefficiency of the forms of communication, right? So we really need to think about, reconsider power and information and who is doing the labor of sharing that information. So this is a very perfect moment for us to reassess all of these various bifurcated systems of communication on campus and figure out a structure that places these various departments and offices in conversation with one another. As we've heard already many times, that it's very unfortunate that many of our offices are operating in a constant state of emergency and unable to even take a moment to implement strategies for improvement, create action plans, do the proper training for them, let alone even being able to hire appropriate number of staff to adequately provide that service, that quality of service, right, that the respective units need, as well as that students deserve, right? So those are things for us to think about. In my position as a faculty in residence, for instance, residential life was missing 7 staff members this academic year, and one of those vacant positions is a person who was supposed to directly work with faculty and residents in terms of training and programming. So in short, the communication and training was extremely minimum, and that's where it placed us, for those of us that are in this position, to become very creative and also to think about for myself, right, how to reach out to established campus and community partners, right, in order to do my job. So from what I've observed is that there's been a very long overdue building of a true collaboration with residential life and other student program offices and centers, because these offices have a direct interaction and provide students with vital support. So when the notification went out on that Tuesday that campus was shutting down, I tapped into pre-existing relationships, and I'm talking about this, right? We have to place a precedence on relationships, right? These connections. So tapping into relationships with undergraduate residence advisors and other students in the dorms to assess what were some of the most immediate burdens and how to help students in the dorm during that crisis of that evening and that week. So one of the first knee-jerk reaction was to take students, right, to purchase food. I began working actually with Chicano student programs to strategize how to coordinate coordinate rides to get students home. Figuring out how can students access renters' rights for information to terminate apartment leases, which has been one of the biggest concerns for a lot of students, is that they're already burdened right now with barely being able to pay rent, and then not being able to terminate that lease further burdens and disenfranchises their families, right? So along with these disenfranchisements, right, we also trying to find financial resources for students from mixed legal status families, right? And some of them, many of them who are working class, and now we see are vital workers, right? One of the other things that we also had to figure out was how to work with students who were stuck at the airports in Mexico to come home. So these are a lot of things, right? How to start working even legally with folks. So this is definitely, I want to take time to acknowledge all of the various student office program officers that are here on this call, and people that I reached out to, as well as other academic counselors during this time. And so I know a lot of people were doing various forms of labor, and so I want to acknowledge all of that real investment and connections and forms of communications that everyone was doing at this time. So what we need to focus on, I think, in this position is looking at like a transparency, integrity. How do we build trust across the board on this campus, right? Because there's a need to acknowledge that there's a long-term problem about communication, right? And how this is going, this lack thereof, right, affects my trust in an institution with regards to our health and safety on a larger scale. And I mean, even basic information of how we have to search through the website to see if and how our community is being impacted by confirmed cases, right? Rather than based on hearsay and those quote unquote informal networks, right? So these are things to think about. And, you know, I do have some other comments, you know, to further expand upon, but if we're thinking about a master plan, this is the moment to update whatever our big plan is and talk about the disproportionate impacts that this pandemic has had on our student demographics, particularly first gen, communities of color, LGBTQ, women faculty, faculty in general, and how we can create services and institutions. So some of the things that I want to pose as possible items for discussion are thinking about subsidized housing for students. We definitely need to think about larger scholarships banks for students, because when we think about the students that we are working with, yes, we could go after students that might come from already families that have generational wealth. But when we want, what kind of impact do we see UCR having is assisting students that will have a mobility shift, right? When we think about who are those most in needs and how we can impact that, it would be students that would most benefit from it. And reimagining of our assessments in terms of thinking about, because of the disruptions that we have experienced right now, how that's going to affect students, faculty, and staff, right? So we have to really think about, reimagine what assessments and outcomes do we value, and how do we understand that we need to see these expectations in our current reality.
Thank you so much, Xochitl. We have one last panelist to bring into this conversation, which is Jason Steich, incoming. Academic Senate Chair. I want to ask you, Jason, if you could speak to how the university might attend to inequitable burdens on graduate students and non-Senate instructors and researchers, because I know that you work with several folks in both of those groups.
Great, yes, thanks, Dana. It's great to be part of this. And I think I'm learning as much as I can, more than I can probably share, which is my goal here as well. But I think that I certainly don't have a plan of solutions to these inequities because they've been around for quite a long time. I think that what we're hearing about are these historical power struggles that are being really exacerbated through these extremes. And so I think that I guess what I've already heard and what I'm thinking is a better way to get a voice to these struggles, to these differences, such that that information is better part of the conversation that we have with each other, and because ultimately not everything is a consequence of a lack of empathy, but I think bringing empathy to the table helps us find better ways to find solutions when in these very specific conversations about cuts, about how to make a decision, about how to adjust a budget that's now completely messed up. Empathy has to somehow be part of that equation, and I think that empathy comes from a shared understanding. So particularly for graduate students, let's say, in that context, both for students that I interact with in my own groups or through my advising in different programs, I think not being able to have this bridge between faculty and students and staff and students towards that shared that struggle that everyone's going through to better understand it, and so that these the word silo has been used a couple times. It's very, very easy. I am very much aware of my own siloed interactions with people on campus, and so I think ways to overcome those walls would help a lot in understanding where the changes can be made. So I can't say that I bring to the table like solutions yet. I feel like I'm thinking more about how that communication, opening that communication would bring more people to the conversation and bring more empathy to the situation. And I think in terms of what staff and postdoctoral scientists, staff that are supporting the research mission, staff that are supporting the student teaching mission, staff that are supporting many different ways. There's a lot of need for to understand that we're not actually all in the same boat. We're all going through a challenge, but we're coming at it from very different financial, very different family situations that it just understanding, I think would be something special for UCR, that we are more of a community that we can build from that, and it's not that it has to be this kind of. I mean, there are hierarchies. We're not going to get rid of hierarchies completely in any rapid way, but I think that there could be there could be better conversations through that. So at least that's my perspective on that. And then I guess the burden that might be different, particularly in this time, is of course asking people to do more than they really can, but not feeling like they can say no to it because we're in an emergency or it's extreme. And so figuring out how we can set boundaries better in that, if that means if there's a union contract and you should not be a TA for more than 20 hours a week, that's a clear document that students have been communicated about. But how does that work in other situations where there isn't a contract, where it isn't clear what you're supposed to say no to? And so, yeah, again, and also from the perspective of someone asking someone to do something, maybe they're not thinking about the other person's current situation in that. And so even with our undergraduate students who are struggling at home for many different reasons, maybe just because they're stuck at home, even beyond the illnesses that might be going around them, how can we bring that information and that sense that we're part of a community back? It won't solve the problem, but I think it might help us find better solutions to them. So that's my current perspective on it, but I'm really here to learn a ton from what's happening here. And yeah, Jennifer's mentioning that I didn't, that there are adjunct faculty and there are faculty who are on contracts where, for example, the idea of bringing people back to campus to teach, they may feel very, very pressured to teach in a situation that may not feel safe to them because their job might be on the line if their instruction can't be delivered through remote learning. So we have to protect and at least recognize that there's going to be different situations for everyone about, you know, how we manage the safety aspects of this. That's my those are my thoughts now. It's best I can, but I'm learning a ton from hearing everyone else. So thank you.
Likewise. I'm so grateful to all of these panelists. I did have a final question that I wanted to ask to everyone, but it's 5:08. And that final question was sort of, how might the pandemic lead us to re-envision UCR and the research university? And specifically, what's your top action item? What alliances should we be building? Procedures to change? Policies to campaign for? Who do we need to hear from? I'm wondering if I can just throw that question out and ask you all to type your response in the chat bar. Everyone, if you have a thought about sort of what action items you think we need to collaboratively push toward, that way we can also open up some time for people to actually speak who have been sitting so amazingly and wonderfully absorbing all of this. If that's okay with the panelists, can we move that last question to the chat bar? Thank you so much. I did my best, but I knew it. I knew it was going to happen. Okay, so in that case, we can open things up. And I'm going to hand over to Georgia Warnke. If you have a comment, question that you would like to speak, remember you will be recorded. Please, click that blue raise hand button. You all know how to do that, right? And the participants, we're all experts now. Or drop it in the chat bar. And while folks are looking for the button, I just want to repeat that I've started a Piazza discussion board, which I've linked to, and I'll do it again, for conversations to continue after this panel is finished. And again, to remind folks that there's the second in our series of panels on May 26th, Tuesday, about research in the time of pandemic. You can find that info on the ideasinsociety.ucr.edu.
Okay, so we have a question from Keisha Forsyth.
Yes, hello. I'm an incoming student. Thank you for all the information, the valuable information here. Thank you everyone who's on the panel. I don't know how relevant this question is. Specifically, it's directed to Patricia. When you were talking about your list of requests, I was thinking, for students who, the reason I say I don't know how relevant it is because I don't know when, if and when students will return to campus. However, for students who applied for family housing, say if your contract comes up at whatever point, right, and it gets pulled, I know that you cannot have a minor in the housing who's over 18. So just for this specific example, I did apply for housing. Who knows when it'll come up, but my son, who also just graduated from high school, he has been accepted to one of the Cal State universities. Cal State has announced that they are not having in-person classes, so they will, basically those students will be staying at home. So I wanted to know if it was possible through your request, if it is a question that could be asked in terms of how will they deal with families who will come on campus, who has a student who should have gone off to college, but are going to have to do remote learning for, an indefinite amount of time.
So I don't have an answer to that. I'm going to be totally honest with you. But these are the sorts of issues that have been coming up that, graduating students who have no home to go to. So there are a lot of issues. And unfortunately, I think that housing and residence life, they're really overwhelmed and don't, in fact, have good answers. But the only thing I can offer is that you do need to talk to the staff there, because they're actually the ones who really know what's going on. We're trying to provide mutual aid, so we're kind of doing case by case, and so a lot of our demands are actually very specific.
Right.
But the larger issue is about housing, and the idea of subsidized housing, I really love that idea. I think that this is something that addresses so many different problems across the board, not only at UCR, but in our community. But, if you want to, we can try to provide some help if you are not getting answers. So
I was wondering if that was one of it. Is it possible that that could be added to your request of things to address, or at least consider that students will be placed in this type of situation?
Yeah. I guess. I mean, I don't know. We were trying to give them demands that actually covered a whole group of people who are a part of the Alliance.
I understand.
Yeah, but I'm happy to talk to you and help with whatever we can do. Yeah.
Keisha, this is Miriam. I'm sorry. I just want to say we can certainly carry that message to the administration. Housing is a big dilemma right now for the fall, because that's where some of the biggest hit will be. And as you know, they've kept one residence hall open since April, and that is to accommodate folks who couldn't go anywhere else, right, including international students, some students with family and such, and tried to spread everybody out so that it's single unit, single residency units and such, and as far apart as possible with the bathrooms and such. And so they're trying to plan out different scenarios for those who have needs in the fall and need to be on campus. So certainly folks with housing and such would be at the top, with families, I'm sorry, would be at the top of that list. And so I think we need to let VC Jerry Bonmati know that this should be high on the list of hierarchization or prioritization. So Dylan and I and Jason will certainly forward that up.
Thank you so much, Patricia and Miriam. I appreciate your responses.
I see some thumbs up, but I don't see any more questions. Am I missing somebody?
We're all absorbing. This is a lot. But please do keep entering.
Okay, wait. Xochitl has a question or a comment.
Yeah, let me make sure I unmuted myself. I just wanted to make sure, I think in earlier conversations, what we're hearing is that there's different scales of needs, right? And based on particular timeframes. And so and this was something I was speaking with Dana about earlier, and I wanted to make sure to just bring that up again in terms of there's immediate need, this next academic year, or even just and next academic year, and long-term, right? So, there's a lot for us to definitely traverse as we're looking through all of this. And then just to kind of follow up on Miriam, that yes, less than 200 students were moved within weeks 6 and 7 to Lothian, and then other students were placed in Glenmore. And so in total, there are 1,100 students left on campus housing.
And Dylan has a comment.
This is, I think, on the scale of things, a somewhat small thing, but I think it's still substantive. I don't know if folks got a chance to look at the letter that Janet Napolitano sent out. I think it was 2 or 3 days ago about the budget cuts. And I don't know how you all felt about this. I found it really insulting that she wrote how she and the chancellors are taking a voluntary 10% pay cut. That actually really pissed me off. I think that they should all take a fucking faculty salary for a year. How about that? I think a lot of, Yeah, I think some of the really highly paid administrators would really do well to redistribute some of that institutional wealth for at least a year by taking a faculty salary, maybe a really good faculty salary so they can live well and pay the mortgage and whatnot. But I mean, I think that's what we should be doing. You know, faculty can take their own progressive versions of furloughs or whatever if that's necessary. But when you're talking about some of the, I mean, and this is the UCs, you know what I mean? Like faculty they're already on the lower end, you know, scale of faculty pay at comparable institutions anyways. But I think that's one thing to fight for. And also I think it sends a message, right? That we're not stupid and that we're not going to be pacified by somebody taking a 10% cut off a $400,000 salary. Like that doesn't mean anything. Anyway.
Especially for chancellors who get university paid for housing. They don't
well,
pay
and
for
that's
their
the least
housing.
of it, right? Because you got other folks in the university that are not even the chancellors who are paid a lot more than chancellors are, a lot more. And I'm talking about money that comes from the state, not money that comes from private sources. So I think some of that redistribution would mean that there's probably a pretty significant number of people that would potentially not get laid off.
I think one of the first things that law firms and companies do in a crisis like this is they forgo pay for a year so they can keep their employees on. The fact that this isn't
Georgia
just
Warnke
given.
said that. Georgia Warnke said that, not me. Georgia
No, it's just a given that in a crisis, the leaders who make lots and lots of money forgo their salary till the crisis is over. That's what you do if you're a leader. Patricia.
I think Jennifer was first.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I'm very bad at this. Jennifer?
Okay. Yeah. So, you know, I think the salary issue is interesting too, because we have salary equity problems on our campus that could be addressed, just as you're saying about chancellors, you know, having an equal cut or even a graduated furlough, right, for tiers doesn't actually really address equity issues. So if we were to think about a counter budget, I think something similar could be said for extraordinarily highly paid faculty who, you know, you could say the top 10 paid faculty on the campus make as much as all of the women assistant professors combined, right? So I think that there's also something to be said about using furloughs, and this is again in the realm of really sort of corrective vision that might be a stretch, but you could use furloughs to actually begin to address equity issues, right? Instead of putting, in one of the early communications we had on our campus, salary equity corrections for staff were one of the first things on the chopping block, right? So there's a way that you could leverage furloughs to begin to think about redress of equity. So this is similar and analogous to Dylan's call. Yeah.
Pat?
So I am so sick of staff being the ones who take the hits. I've been at UCR for over 25 years. I have been around for all of these damn budget cuts, and the staff, the most vulnerable people, especially the ones without contracts, the first to go. The merits and, you know, any salary increases is like, oh, they see the staff and it's so disrespectful, and it so degrades the work that you all do, and it is so valuable. I mean, you're not like even the third leg, honestly, you're like the ones that we depend on. So I'm just going to express that anger, that I am just enraged when I see the ways in which it's like, oh, salary freeze, et cetera, et cetera. It's so inequitable, and I really don't want to take it. So I'm actually kind of, the other thing I want to say is that I think it was Jennifer and I had a conversation maybe on Facebook or something about an alternative budget. And I don't know if we could do that because of course there's almost no transparency about the budget. But I know I've seen proposals that said, okay, if we cut all of the really high salary people, you know, not just the administrators, whoever's making really giant salaries, down to 400,000, oh, you know, so they'd really be taking a cut. That could actually really be the equivalent to X number of lecturer salaries, and we could keep the salary cuts, you know, lift the salary freeze for staff, etc. I don't know how we would do that exactly, but I think it's something to try for. And if we have faculty or staff with expertise in this area, that's something that I would really love to see us work on. And even if it's something kind of pie in the sky, I think just to say, hey, austerity is not the only way we can do things.
Am I missing more
Hi,
hands?
this is Trina Ellerts. I didn't raise my hand, I apologize, but I'm a staff member and I just want to say thank you, Pat. I saw a couple people in the chat that said thank you for that statement as well. One of my biggest concerns when we start talking about furloughs, I was here in 2008 when we did this before, and I was already working part-time and I was asked to cut my hours even more. And no one ever talked to me about the type of service that I could also cut, because I was in a student service-based job and working 30 hours a week, but then I was also expected to keep the same level of service to provide, but also get paid less and work less hours. And so that really concerns me, because I don't hear anybody talking about what those furloughs mean and what kind of services will be cut and how we're going to handle that and how we're still going to support our students and our faculty and our staff and everybody else that comes in contact with our campus when we're not able to put in the hours that are needed to provide those kinds of services. So that's the kind of conversation I want to hear happening at the supervisory levels, at the dean levels, at the chancellor's level, about what these extra shortages, as Julie pointed out, we're already 760 staff short. And so what are we going to do about the hours that we're also going to cut to the people who are already here doing the best that we can? That's what concerns me, and I want to hear those conversations begin somewhere, somehow. Thanks.
Thank you for that.
And I just want to add to that. I'm just kind of adding more kerosene to the fire, but I think it's appropriate. Is that we don't have a lot of conversation about cuts to administrators, not administrative staff, mind you, but cuts to administrator positions, right? And this is not about firing people, because most people who have administrative posts have a faculty post as well, right? But that's another avenue that could actually, you know, save a lot of folks from working in understaffed conditions or getting laid off, would be to think about, well, why don't you all trim some of the administrative positions that you've created, and which may or may not actually be necessary for the university to fulfill its mission.
I just wanted to add to the comments that were just made by Pat and Dylan, but to really ask anyone who is faculty on this call to do your best in the conversations that you're in and any discussions that you're invited to be in, to really advocate for staff. Because we can try to ask as much as we can to be invited into these rooms, but at the end of the day, we know that we're not invited into as many rooms as faculty are. So we need your help to be able to advocate for us, to be able to use the respect that you've been granted very duly by the university and by everyone else, but to advocate for us, because we are here to serve you. We are here to serve the students and the mission of the university, but without you all advocating for us, it's going to make our jobs much harder, which in turn will make your job much harder. So that's all I wanted to add.
So Dylan, we have shall I read Catherine's question? I think it's, you'll be a good person to answer, Dylan, which is, how much authority or control will UCR leadership have over the impacts of budget cuts? How much room is there for creative and alternate budget solutions?
Not as much as you think. In fact, I think this is one of the key points that well, not just me, but a number of folks were asking the chancellor to communicate to us, meaning kind of rank and file faculty, staff, and students as well. The decisions around that stuff are almost entirely made up in Oakland at UCOP. So once that's made up at UCOP, there's wiggle room for each of the campuses to figure out how it's going to happen. But in terms of, for example, for faculty, if and when we take a furlough and or salary cut, like that's not going to be a campus by campus decision. That'll be a decision that's made up in Oakland. But it's weird, right? So it's still, a lot of it is both. Sometimes it's intuitive and sometimes it's counterintuitive, because some of these, like for example, the so-called reopening of campuses, that's a campus by campus decision. That's not a central decision. So some of this stuff is weird. So I think the best thing to do on all this stuff that's going down right now is to persist with questions, and don't hesitate to send it not just to your Senate chair, but send it to your dean, send it to your provost, send it to your chancellor. Go for it.
I was just going to jump in, Dylan. This is Jason, but that I think also that the colleges are probably going to have to be making some of those decisions too. So maybe the local departments and dean level decisions about how to, whatever number they're going to be told they have to cut, they're going to be making those on the ground decisions, but not the furlough whatever that number is going to be, right, will come down from on high. But the question from Catherine was what kind of creative solutions could there be? That might be the best place to try to innovate, because maybe, at least in my college, our dean has been very open to people suggesting, or at least coming up with ideas about ways to kind of plug holes.
Right
so
on. I mean, that's what I think I was trying to speak to that earlier by saying that I think if there's a redistribution of salary, and if some of our highest paid colleagues and administrators would take, I mean, that's one. I don't think it's that creative, frankly. I think it's just like a modest attempt at a liberal version of economic justice for a year or two. I don't even think it's radical.
Crystal, do you have another? Did you want to say something else, or did you forget to put your hand down?
Just forgot, sorry.
That's okay.
It's 5:30. And we've done a lot of work. A lot of work. You have done a lot of work. I've just asked questions. I should clarify. So much work, and so much work to do.
Dana, you herded us together. You did the bulk of the work. We just came and talked. Thank you for doing it.
I'm so grateful. I feel like we can now think of this in a more collective sense, having gathered. And to respond to Anna, I think we can communicate via email. Is that correct, George or Catherine, with those people who registered? Is it possible to send a follow-up email? If it is, we'll do it. And if not, again, I know that this is Piazza. I know that it's a private company. It's not UCR though, which is a good thing. I've started a class. It's a summer class. You can register on Rethinking UCR in the age of COVID-19. So if you just signed up as an instructor, we're all instructing each other here. And hopefully we can use that at least as a starting point to, I will send these links out if it's possible, I'm not sure. It has been so touching to see many of you here who I know and have worked with and loved. So thank you again for coming, all of you. Deep, deep thanks to the panelists. I think we're going to leave this space open, if we can, for people to, as a reception room kind of thing. So panelists are released. You're all released. But if you want to stick around and chat, I think you can for another half hour.
Dana, thank you so much for organizing this. Yeah, really.
Thank you, Dana.
Thank you, everyone, for all your comments.
Yeah.
I'm gonna hang out. I can hang out for a few more minutes. I can't let go.
I just wanted to thank Catherine too for hanging in there and setting
Right
us
on.
all
Thank
up.
you, Catherine.
Thank you.
Being under the weather as she is. Let's all clap so that Catherine gets better.
Thank you, Catherine.
CIS is amazing. Amazing. I was going to say too that maybe since we have, you know, those of the CIS folks who have hosting ability, if you want to, you could request potentially to go to a breakout room if there's someone who you want to talk to, in a kind of simulated, like reception kind of context. And if not, we can just hang.
Hey, this is Fortino. I was one thing I was going to just mention. Well, first of all, thank you to everyone that's put this on and everyone that's speaking. One thing I was just going to mention too, I think in terms of kind of salary and budget, right? So just thinking about what Crystal's mentioned about the amount of staff that we don't have, and just to get us to the average, the financial kind of resources that we would need are, you know, at least $30 million. You know, just doing very back of the napkin kind of calculations on an annual basis for just salary. That's not including benefits or operational budgets on top of that. And so in terms, you know, I mean, and I definitely agree with kind of what has been said around kind of admin staff, admin salaries, but I think it's a drop in a bucket, right? I mean, even if you look at the chancellor's salary of $500,000 or whatever it is, 300,000, when we need 30 million on an annual basis minimum, I think really, and what that points to me is that we need to be kind of going towards the state and going to Oakland and UCOP and advocating as a campus, as a community, you know, with students, faculty, and staff all kind of taking a really strong advocacy role there, and not accepting the fact that we get, you know, the least amount of resources, you know, across the campuses. I think that to me seems like where you're going to find $30 million. So, and that's just minimum of what we need there. So that's just kind of one thing I wanted to mention. I think kind of advocating on that Oakland and state level is going to be helpful.
John, did you want to say something?
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, this was about the $30 million. I'm actually on a review committee right now, reviewing a unit on campus that has managed to sequester $36 million from the rest of the campus. And the administration is letting them do this. This is the School of Business, by the way, right? And so through their, what do you call it? These are not state-supported programs, but they're so-called self-supporting programs. But what they in fact are is something that is difficult to distinguish from a degree mill. In any case, this operation that they have does, and this is money that they've been boasting about because they wanted to build their fancy new building over where the CIS is actually located, but that idea has gratefully been nixed. But they still have $36 million, and it seems to me that one of the things that the faculty should watch out for is to see where there are pockets of money that are explicitly, I mean, by you know, Senate-wide decision, I mean, system-wide Senate-wide decision. These monies are supposed to be dispersed throughout campus, and they're not. Right? And there are these little pockets of money, not many. We only have around 6 or 7 of these types of self-supporting programs on campus. Other campuses like UCI, they are massively supported by self-supporting programs. But you know, we do have these pockets, these units that are hoarding this kind of money. And so these are one of the things that I've been working on this one, on the Senate Committee on Graduate Council, Jason Stages, and there's a lot about this, as well as ERETH. And so anyway, that's just something I just want to let everyone know about.
I'd like to go back to Fortino's point. RFA has actually been agitating, and I know Dylan and the Senate have been as well, but we've really been focusing on the inequity across the system, that UCR receives so much less funding per student. Our core funding is, you know, 8,000 at UCR versus 11,000 at UCLA. I've learned a lot about why there's all this kind of weighting, like if you have medical school, then you get more money, which whatever. But so we actually thought that Wilcox had gotten pretty close to an agreement where UCOP would give more money to UCR, Santa Cruz, and I think Merced, I've forgotten, there were three. But you know, this is exactly the problem, is that now we're in a crisis, and so that's going to go out the window. And there'll be an excuse to keep the status quo because, oh, we can't, you know, we're already facing all these budget cuts. God forbid we should give more money to UCR. But I don't think we should let it go. I actually think we need to keep pushing on this issue because the inequity then just gets locked in. And it's, you know, a little bit playing off of what Jennifer was saying as well. Like, this is a moment to address structural inequities instead of just furthering them. So I think we need to address the inequity, the unequal, you know, differential treatment of staff for sure. But I think we also need to say, hey, within the system, there's also this deep, you know, basically Dylan calls it structural racism, institutionalized racism. So that's just to say there, you know, we shouldn't give up.
Can I ask about this, go to the state? Because I also feel like we often get in conversations at UCR where demands for funding, you know, we have a conversation about how there's not enough. And then the answer is, well, we need to go to the state. And I feel like we end up in a kind of infinite loop around that. And I don't know how to navigate that loop. What does go to the state mean? I know it means lobbying, I guess.
Dana, I'm with you on that. If I can just give an anecdote that I think serves as a kind of word of caution around the artificially compartmentalizing our different tactics and strategies around resources. I remember like it was yesterday that students, when Tim White was our chancellor still, that students were engaged in a major campus, one of the largest actions I ever saw at our campus, right? But a major action against the raising of tuition. There was a takeover, you know, nonviolent takeover, sit down kind of takeover of Hinderaker. And that was the line that Tim White used to persuade the student leadership of that movement, of that kind of student-based protest, to go to Sacramento with him, right? So they went to Sacramento. So what was starting as a kind of movement against the regents and demanding solidarity from the chancellor in pushing back against the regents turned into Tim White. I think he bragged about how they ate spaghetti together that night in Hinderaker, right? He like ordered them pizza and they all ate spaghetti together. And by the end of the night, he had convinced the student leadership. It wasn't, not all the students were down with this, but some of the student leadership they did it. They went up there and they were yelling, you know, they started yelling at the legislature. So on the one hand, it is an opportunity for, you know, real coalescence with a shared interest with our own administration, right? Because they want it too, right? Without a doubt, like they're tired of this inequity also. But it has to be a both and situation. Like we have to be flexible, and it's like guerrilla war, man. Like we have to fight on all these fronts at once. It's not just the state that we need to be. But I've been saying more than I care to remember that if you eliminate 2 California state prisons, you solve the problems for the entire higher education system in California, right? You do that. Like you can actually do that. But at the same time, we still need to be fighting around transparency and creative, what folks on this call have been calling the kind of creative, I want to call it redistribution of scarce resources on campus. So I think it has to be a both and situation. I don't want to be eating spaghetti with, unless I want to.
We may be exhausted. That might be a possibility. Anyone else want to hang out or jump in, or should we call it a night? I think we're exhausted. This was really wonderful, besides which I'm so happy to see you. Really, really, really grateful. So thank you. there'll be more panels. You'll hear from the CIS. We'll see if we can follow up with an email. If we can't follow up with an email, you know, hop on Piazza and we'll try and send out resources. If you don't like Piazza, we'll find another place, just as a jumping off point.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you,
Take
Georgia.
very good care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye. Great to see you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.